You're about to watch a clip from my discussion with Michael Brooks of The Michael Brooks Show. If you want to watch the full interview, it's up early now for patrons at patreon.com/therationalnational. You can also go to therationalnational.com/join, and I'll have a link below this video directly to that post so you can get there easily. But for now, here's a clip of my discussion with Michael Brooks of The Michael Brooks Show. Let's turn to the intellectual dark web now, because you have a book coming out in the summer, I believe. Is there a name for it yet?
There isn't a name for it yet. It's going to be in the summer or the fall. I'm like, it's getting a lot closer, and then I feel like the name will reveal itself. That's like the hardest part.
Yeah, definitely.
So, have you written a book?
Sorry?
Have you written a book?
Oh no, I'm not sure if anywhere near writing a book, but just in terms of like titling like videos, I understand what you're talking about in terms of that sense. But yeah. So what have you learned in all your work on researching the IDW? What have you taken away from this weird, awkward movement that really isn't about anything that's different or new, isn't really about helping people? I mean, what is sort of your overall perspective on the IDW?
Well, this is really tricky. I mean, because there's some bigger takeaways, which are going to be the kind of like core of the book in a way. And almost, I think if I do my job well, they'll at least be an interesting option more generally for how to approach left-wing politics. One of the things that's tricky is like, there is a part of me that's like, I mean, come on, like we haven't moved past this shit.
Yeah.
But I've had to subordinate that a little bit because I realize like I do. For the first part is like, look, and I think Amber Frost made this point really well. Like, you can't moralize one way or another. Like, I know, like, and I get the tendency. I understand, like, oh, wow, like, whiny, young white males, blah, blah, blah. But the truth of the matter is like, even take it without any empathy or compassion. That's a pretty dangerous demographic.
Yeah.
You might want to fucking think about them and actually try to strategize because, most of them are not going to just be persuaded by you suck, go away.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, that's like the first thing is like, okay, there is a real, crisis here. There is something that's being spoken to here. So what do we do about it? And I think there's like sort of three different kind of lanes that I sort of go through. So like one is like, yes, I do think that, and this isn't like a particularly, I'm echoing other people here, but I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction, which is like, yes, the sort of standard, whatever you want to call it, woke, blah, blah, blah culture, it's not going to do the job. And, in terms of like answering the contradictions or the problems or the concerns that are raised by this subculture. And it's both not going to do the job in ways that speak well of it because, people don't want to be real about and confront some of the problems that the woke culture is at least diagnostically right about, things like racism. And they're also not going to work because, frankly, like they are, super moralistic and controlling, and they do tend to have really reactive, reductionist, repetitive takes that, again, I do think most people out. And I think this is a lesson for all of us that it's so easy to be in micro subcultures right now that you really have to consider whether you're, a brocialist Joe Rogan head or a fucking SJW or a Bernie bro. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that don't share your subcultural presuppositions. They do not. So I think, okay, so there's like, okay, there's a legitimate crisis. There's the failures of what is at least presented in the mainstream as a left answer to those crises. And so then what I do in the book is first, I deal with, after kind of setting up the bigger framework, I deal with the three main personalities, which is Peterson, Shapiro, and Harris. And, obviously, I mean, look, so I'm trying to be less polemical and really deal with them in some ways. And, it's still my book. So, like, as an example, like, Dave Rubin's Dave Rubin.
Yeah.
That's a joke.
Yeah. That's a
And
joke
that
in
will be a
itself.
joke in the book, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, but, so I think that there's a fundamental difference, though. And I think, again, this is another reason why, to me, Sam Harris is absolutely somebody of the right. Because, a lot of people with this, like, they have been trained in these like tick box view of politics, which is like, oh, well, other than these, it's almost like they've been trained in like the generation that could say like, oh, like Clinton is 95%, she voted with Bernie 95% of the time. It's like, oh, well, you mean, but the 5% was like the invasion of Iraq, the Patriot Act, all of the main generation.
All the important parts, yeah.
Right. It's like, okay, I'm glad that they agreed on, honoring a baseball player today or calling something Willie Mays Day together, but that doesn't really tell us anything.
Yeah.
So the way Sam Harris is right wing, in my view, and what they all share is that it's a fundamentally anti-historical enterprise. Harris has this weird, he thinks that a combination of poll numbers and thought experiments can eliminate the need to historicize really major issues that he runs into. He's got big opinions about over 1 billion people on the planet. He's got big opinions about resurrecting the idea that some races are potentially, on average, genetically less intellectually capable. These are. And my track, again, is it's not just like you're a bigot. If you asked me personally what my opinion was, I would say yes. I do think he is. But it's that you literally cannot understand these things without a serious historical anchoring. The idea, like when you look at Afghanistan and you look at a real piece of reporting like Ghost Wars by Steve Cole, and you understand that in the 80s, even Afghan Mujahideen fighters did not want to do suicide operations. That was not in their context. You have to, all of a sudden, you're in a conversation where you have to understand what was the financial flow. Like and it's not just because they go on this counteroffensive where it's like all you're saying is like ideology doesn't matter. It's just U.S. foreign policy. The real answer is that every single thing matters. But I think with a materialist viewpoint, ironically, me with the materialist viewpoint, even though I'm not this big, atheist, whatever, is that people's actual, literal material conditions and practices are the most sort of influential. So anyways, and then with, Peterson, there's his mythological thing. And then Ben Shapiro presents this. I mean, he's writing a history, but it's this, it's like Reader's Digest for, 12-year-old, whatever. And so the argument is that we need to historicize all of these things and then re-anchor these conversations in people's real, actual conditions. And then from that, the synthesis that I'm trying to create is like this idea of like a cosmopolitan socialism or a globalist socialism, in the sense that, on one hand, we're not in this like woke space, and I'm following the lead of people like Kanan Malik, who's a really big influence on mine, who wrote this global history of ethics recently. And the way it sort of breaks down in a simple way is like, if you talk about ancient Greece, which funnily enough, I don't talk that much about because I'm not as educated on it as I should be, but I do know this, that there's this Western chauvinist position that's like, hey, we go back to Greece and Greece to fucking America and fuck you, and, the West, right? The classic chauvinist bigot position, which even if like the IDW and certainly Shapiro echoes, right? And then there's this like new, like, oh no, I don't want, those are dead white men, blah, 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 right? And then it's like, well, actually, what's funny is like a lot of these guys, and the Romans too, for that matter, were African. So you're not talking about dead white men. You're actually already talking about a global culture. So that and a global culture trying to find global themes and echoing global experiences. So you aren't just bifurcating people into ever and ever greater separation. You're not drawing a false equivalency, but you are asserting that there does have to be common struggle.
Yeah.
And then on the other, but then of course, conversely to these fucking chauvinists, I mean, all of the history that they want to negate, like the transition where Islam held the Greeks, and or the fact that the Greeks were African, literally shows you that this idea of like some uninterrupted chain is ahistorical in addition to being bigoted. So the argument then is like, what we do need a solidarity rooted in our real material conditions. That is people call it the vulgar Marxist view, which usually, I'm sorry to say, just, it's called Marxism. Like, yes, there is a lot of that. But conversely, where you can't skip the quote unquote culture questions is that one, everything, of course, isn't just like misplaced economic anxiety. There are ideological lives for bigotry, and they exist in their own trajectory. And so my answer, instead of though retreating back to that kind of like the sort of shallow woke politics, which I'm rejecting, but you have to build the corollary of that global solidarity is that it has to truly be like a genuinely global intellectual exercise. And I try to do that on my show, right? Like I really try to the extent that is humanly possible to, again, not discourse about something, but say like somebody like Cabral is a huge influence on how we need to think. And that's at the center. That's not like, like expand your horizons day. So that's sort of like, and then the last component of it that also sort of answers the book is like, answers the IDW, is that this is also, it's such a weird time to retreat into the stories that these guys are peddling in a time not only of huge economic anxiety in the West and changes in how people are living and experiencing the economy, which they're not speaking to, but then also the fact that like even on a just capitalist level, like, like Asia is actually rising. That isn't just like a kind of cliche. There is a global reorientation of power. So how are you even on like a pragmatic self-improvement level, if you want to take it there, really preparing yourself to like properly engage in today's world if you're, a kind of intellectual and cultural shut-in?
Yeah. And
so that's not what I'm dealing with.
There's a one point there I wanted to hit on just briefly. So you mentioned the shallow woke politics. That's something that someone like Jordan Peterson tries to hit on a lot. And I'm not sure if you saw the debate between Zizek and Peterson. I actually thought that Zizek did a good job trying to almost appeal to that side of that shallow woke politics, but then get them into a different perspective when it comes to capitalism. So yeah, I think you make some great points there. And I think it's important that we understand a lot of these people that follow, these sorts of figures, they're just uneducated. And if you get at them with something that they are familiar with, and you sort of, you kind of half agree with them on the shallow woke politics, like you agree with the parts of it that are legitimate, but then you get them in and you show them that, hey, actually, also on these other issues, here's a different perspective that you may not be aware of. But I think there is definitely a way to reach a lot of these people, because if they're uneducated, all we have to do is educate them, but do it in a way where we can actually grab them to begin with. And I think we can do that by exposing the shallow woke politics.
And then you also, I think, you make really clear where people are actually coming from, right? Because then it's like, look, if you really are rooted in some type of prototypical white nationalism or something, then all right, you're the enemy.
Yeah, exactly.
On a political, like there's literally nothing complicated about that. And even there, like maybe that's dealt with, like, I don't know how you convert people like that. I know sometimes people like that are converted. I know that some people put in like incredible work in doing that type of thing. So I'm not even negating that. But on a political level, that is just like simple. I think that is the kind of room that, you need to be able to have. You need to be able to take on that people might have different cultural practices. They might have different ideas. They might have different experiences. They might even be rightly critiquing your subculture with, how you perceive any number of these like hot button things. Mm-hmm. But then if somebody is actually saying like, I don't want women in the workforce, or like I'm totally down with what they're doing in Alabama, then okay, like
Yeah, it's
good.
kind of hard to get somebody at that point. I mean, yeah.
But I think the right, and that, but I think the problem is that, and this, and it's funny to say this because, like, again, it's a dialectic. There's a lot of areas that we need to polarize way more on, but
Mhm.
there's other areas, I think, in a kind of cultural and digital space where people are definitely polarizing in ways that are just like both super feeble in terms of like thinking capacity and super off-putting to people. And again, I think that, part of this idea about reaching out, it's like it just isn't even a moral question. It's like it's not. It's like the morals are really simple. Do you like there's a rising social democratic party in Denmark, and part of the way the leader there, the part of the way she's doing it is she is seriously appealing to very harsh xenophobic attitudes. Well, for me, that's like, okay, that's the moral line.
Mhm.
Like, done,
Yeah.
right? So that's actually quite simple. But then on the other hand, like if you're going to go out and engage in the real world, like people are going to have like, there's going to be some hot take story of the week, and people are going to have different opinions on it. People are going to find different humor to be funny. Like
Mhm.
if you want to actually go out and deploy in some type of mass way, you need to fucking get over that and deal with it. And I am really tired of these people who I do think, have very, regressive and just totally insufficient. I mean, delusional agendas. These people are not going to help you chart a course for understanding your political, economic, social life. And, and I think, I think Zizek was a great example of that. And I know, but that's another, some people have all sorts of issues with Zizek.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, so, and again, that's fine. So disagree with Zizek, write your response. That's terrific. But I still want Zizek.
Yeah, there has to be
And,
nuance there. I mean, you have to be able to
he's did
separate
a
certain
great
people.
job.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and people need to get much more in the habit of that across the board. And I loved when Zizek made that point, that part of like why that certain attitude can be so off-putting and actually reinforce the same tendencies, that you're still centering yourself in that.
Yeah,
You're still
exactly.
centering, white centrality. It's
Yeah.
just the white centrality of like, oh no, I get it. That's the other part, right? Is like everybody's so freaked out about getting it, not making mistakes. Imagine if you had a culture where people actually could much more in a serious and honest way, actually self-reflect
Yeah.
and have like an openness where people can internally like actually better themselves
Yeah. Have the
without this
space to be able
constant, like,
to, yeah,
yeah, that's
exactly.
actually really important.
Yeah.
That's really important.